When I was a young kid, around 10 I want to say, one of my favorite animated cartoons of all time was a popular adult comedy known as The Simpsons. It was great for a young lad such as myself. I loved the silly Simpson family and their many adventures. The Simpsoning alongside them, rooting for them to succeed with whatever challenge came their way. I think something impressive that show managed to do was make every member of the family feel equally important. Or that a season would pass without at least a couple episodes focusing on them. Sure, they had their preferences, the early seasons especially focusing a lot more on Homer and Bart, but at the same time, as the show went on and the writers grew more accustomed to the family and their dynamics with one another, we saw each and every one of them get the chance to shine in a way only they could. Hell, even Maggie got episodes, and she doesn't even talk. It really shows a certain confidence in their cast, that these characters are all strong enough to carry a story on their own. That's something I can't say about Family Guy.
Griffins, Peter, Lois, Stewie, and then, the others.
Family Guy, as we all know, bears a striking resemblance to The Simpsons in regards to the family setup. Only real difference here is reversing the ages of the boy and girl and letting the baby and dog talk. Despite each family member getting their occasional time to shine, it's not controversial to claim that the writers seem to have their preferences, those being Peter, Brian, and Stewie. I mean, hey, don't take it from me, I'm just repeating what they say. The worst offender here is without a doubt Chris Griffin. Fittingly, the middle child is the one to get the least amount of attention here. I'm not projecting. Answer me this, viewer. What does Chris Griffin do?
Oh my God.
What does he add to the show? Don't answer that actually, because I'll tell ya. Nothing.
Why are you so negative all the time?
While the show has since gone on to explore characters like Lois or Meg a little more in its later years to varying degrees of success, it's hard not to notice that even today, Chris more often than not gets the short end of the stick. The most attention I think he's ever gotten in the series was being the main character of all 3 Star Wars specials. But I don't know if I'd even count that because the thought process here clearly didn't go anywhere beyond, he is blonde. That's not to say Chris episodes don't exist, but they're hardly the most memorable. And it's easy to see why. Out of all the members of the Griffin family, he's by far the least interesting. He is a teenage boy, and is dumb. Chris was more often than not used as a device to aid in other characters' adventures, not star on his own. Because when they did decide to dust him off and see what he could do, it was usually a variation on the same couple jokes over and over. Funny as a side character, but as the protagonist of his own story, not so much. Things have started to change in the past few seasons, however. We've seen more of an effort on the writers' part to flesh Chris out more, to make him a well-rounded character who can get more involved in the antics. And as a result of this, in my opinion at least, they've somehow made Chris worse. Let's talk about it. Here's Chris Griffin. Does nothing.
Oh my God.
Does anyone like Chris? Raise a hands. Alright, smart guys, let me fucking rephrase. Is Chris Griffin anybody's favorite Family Guy character? I can't imagine. If he was, I'd honestly be worried for your mental sanity. Okay, let me back up for a minute because I feel like I'm coming off like Chris Griffin's #1 heater right now, but for real, in early Family Guy, Chris was alright. He mostly just stood around making quips every now and then. He was the comic relief, usually having some random non sequitur here and there.
Wow, I bet you could see right through that.
Chris, who are you talking to?
Grandma.
And in that regard, I think he was great, being used more so as a setup for how the other characters can react to him or deal with his stupidity.
Boobies!
Chris, that's enough.
Boobies!
Peter,
Do it.
did you have fun at the circus today, Chris?
He was a generic teenage boy, and that's all he needed to be because just about every episode of Family Guy at that point was solely focused on Peter, with the other characters usually being delegated to eat him whenever was going on with him or have a less important B story. I think the perfect example of this comes from the first season with The Sun Also Draws, which sees Peter get so frustrated that Chris got kicked out of Scouts that he takes him to the headquarters so they'll let him back in. They then get sidetracked at a Native American casino or something. Fun fact, this was the first episode of Family Guy I ever watched and I thought it was fucking lame. But I've definitely grown more appreciative of these early episodes compared to when I was a kid and just wanted cool, epic edginess and swearing. There's a consistent plot point here that Chris doesn't even want to be in the Scouts. He just wants to draw. A long-forgotten trait of his. I think this is when Chris was at his best. In episode 6, his little arc is simple but incredibly effective. He desperately doesn't want to disappoint his dad and so doesn't know how to tell him that he doesn't want to follow in his footsteps. Him finally building up the courage to let him know how he truly feels.
What, you want to draw? Oh, geez, son, why don't you just stick a knife in my heart?
I love this moment right here, as Peter puts his own feelings aside to be a supportive father and tell Chris that he's proud of him, even if he's still not able to accept it. You get the idea that this is a really personal story, either told from the perspective of a writer on the series, or even Seth himself wanting to pursue a career in cartooning. It's a short moment, and again, the episode is mainly focused on Peter, but again, that's why it works. On his own, Chris is kinda boring. I mean, just listen to him.
Oh my god.
But they managed to do the impossible and make you actually care about him, and it's through his relationships with the other family members. There are even a lot of nice moments between him and Meg throughout the episode, which is a stark contrast to whatever the fuck they were doing later.
Chris, our bath is ready.
Like I said before, however, this really was the best Chris episode out of the entire series. From there, he'd usually get delegated to 1 episode a season, 2 if lucky. But it was oftentimes nothing more than a B-plot or used to kick off something with another character, like Season 2's A Picture's Worth $1,000.
But I painted that just for you.
I don't feel bad, Chris. I didn't even want it.
Here we see the family travel to New York so Peter can abuse Chris's artistic abilities for money without any regard for how he feels about it. I think this might be the last time they ever mention him wanting to be an artist. Again, not a fantastic episode or anything, but it definitely shows the strengths with Chris as a character, and forcing Peter to rethink his more self-absorbed ways as he desperately tries to find a way for one of his kids to be successful so he can have a legacy. And there's even some growth here with Chris too, willing to give up his own dreams if they mean he can never see his dad again. They really pushed this approval angle early on, and it's something I like a lot. It's like an actual piece of consistent motivation for the character. From here, they almost completely abandoned doing anything all that interesting with him. Chris mostly got sidelined to either high school plots, usually about him liking whatever girl of the week they introduce. Although they really started pushing that weird angle, which makes it hard to be invested in the prospect of any girl liking him.
I don't have to go to school. I can just pee in my bed all day.
Sometimes they're aware of this and build a story around it. Like, it's really well done into Love and Die in Dixie, where the entire jumping off point for him is showcasing how he doesn't know how to talk to girls. Then once the family has to flee to the south because of something unrelated, we see him start to bond with one of the guys there before eventually finding out that they're actually a girl. Him learning that the only difference between interacting between the two is the pressure he gives himself. Never see her again. When they're not doing that, we have other dumb gimmicks like in Brian the Bachelor, where the entire B story here is just Chris getting a talking pimple. Wow. Or they simply use him as an excuse to bring Herbert in for a quick gag. Boy, I sure bet they regret making this character so prevalent. Family Guy, please kill off Herbert because I cannot stand that fucking monster. Cry about it, pussy. Jesus, this world is softer than Catenelle. Well, now I totally agree. Things used to be funny. Fuck you. He's right, you're a big fat pussy. Lamau. I know this comment is old, but I just want to say you were just overly sensitive, cunt. Jesus Christ. Other than that, he mainly just stands by the wayside during this era, getting the occasional episode here and there, but aside from that, you can honestly forget he was even in the show. If the entire family were involved in an adventure, sure he'd get his line or two, but for the most part, they were definitely more interested in sticking with the characters they were clearly more comfortable writing for. Again, mainly Peter, Brian, and Stewie. The funniest thing they did with him in this era was having an entire episode where they replaced him with an elephant, and even then, that's not saying much when one of my favorite moments involving your character is an episode where they don't even show up. Okay, you know what, never mind, this is without a doubt the best Chris moment. Look at that twirl.
Chris, where have you been?
I don't know.
I first began noticing a change with how they treated Chris around season 11, with episodes like Space Cadet where they tried to show a more competent side of him. I mean, he lands a fucking rock egg. I think there was certainly an effort going forward to not make Chris as uninvolved in the adventures, a little more aware of what's going on compared to the passive feel he had in the early seasons.
Mom, I need new batteries for my Walkman. Hey, why is everybody else naked?
They actually attempted to have Chris join along for a Brian and Stewie adventure where they time travel and hop aboard the Titanic to help him with a school project. Or they have him take Rupert from Stewie, which makes him go mad and try to kill him. That's something weird they've been doing lately, pushing that Chris and Stewie dynamic. Which is bizarre because, well, he's a baby. I will say, when I get around to that eventual Stewie video, I do want to highlight how it seems as if the writers have forgotten that detail, that Stewie is a baby. You give it a pass when Brian interacts with him because he's a talking dog, so it's already absurd from the get-go. But nope, now Chris can also communicate with him whenever they want to, and it's just kind of weird. Especially given how much Seth Green's performance for him has seriously shifted. His voice used to perfectly encapsulate that dopey personality, but now it's just weird. It's gotten oddly deep and I don't really think it fits. I don't know, maybe it's the way they draw him now. He looks so lifeless.
Dad, I was supposed to build it myself. It's a rule. Well, I should get back to my book.
That's a clock, but okay.
I can understand the want to do more with Chris. When you're over 400 episodes into a series and have a character that's as interesting as a houseplant, it makes sense to want to have them branch out more to open up more storytelling opportunities. The issue is that you can't really do this with a character like Chris 19 seasons into a show. You have to accept the hand you've been dealt and just try to get as much as you can out of him without changing who he was. A purposefully generic and simplistic teenage boy archetype, who would occasionally spout something dumb. It's not like I even care that much about the change. I see a lot of people get mad at me out there who genuinely think these Family Guy discussions are anything other than just dumb discussions. So I'll make it clear, I was never a diehard Chris stan or anything, so who cares? But I don't know. Doing this video kinda reminded me that at one point Chris was a solid character. Just because he didn't add as much as the rest of the Griffins doesn't mean he didn't have his moments. It was charming and funny that for the most part he was just along for the ride, going along with whatever situation he was put in. The more they attempt to give screen time to Chris, the more it only serves to highlight why he was so seldom the focus in the first place. He's simply just not that interesting of a character. Plain and simple. Sure, he hasn't had the catastrophic downfall many other Family Guy characters have had, but it's yet another indication at how far astray the show has gotten. Someone like Chris truly is the perfect encapsulation of what a shell of its former self Family Guy has become. It's no longer shocking, irreverent, catching you off guard at a second's notice. No, it's just kinda weird and boring. But it's okay, Chris. I may have started this video against you, but I've grown to appreciate what you add. You may not be the most interesting Griffin out there, but you sure are important to Family Guy, and I couldn't imagine it without you.
Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot.
Oh my.